Hello, my name is Frida Badamosi. I am a Black American woman. I have dark brown skin. I have black locks. I am wearing gold earrings. In my background is beige and black and colorful post-its that help me stay organized. I'm wearing a green shirt with kind of a gold design. And I'm very excited to be here to welcome you to the 11th Annual Athena Film Festival. On behalf of Barnard College and Women in Hollywood, it is my honor to welcome you. This festival is dedicated to celebrating the stories of bold, courageous women leaders and the filmmakers who bring these stories to life. So thank you again for joining us. As I mentioned, I'm Farida. I am the programmer for Athena Film Festival. This year's festival would not be possible without the support of our dedicated sponsors. Please join me in thanking Athena's founding sponsor, the Artemis Rising Foundation, and its CEO and founder, Regina K. Scully, whose visionary leadership makes our work possible. A special thank you as well to our premier level sponsor, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, which shares our commitment to showcasing stories of women in science. To all of our sponsors, whose names you will see before each film and event, thank you for your commitment to challenging our culture to be more inclusive and inspiring audiences in the process. I didn't mention before, but my pronouns are she, her, hers. So this year, we wanted to create something new and exciting to bring to our audience. So we created these 8 different program areas that we believe react and respond to our current moment. This conversation is part of our Tear It Down, Dismantling White Supremacy program area. In this program area, we take a look at people organizing and taking action to tear down systems of oppression. This panel is on deconstructing whiteness. It's an important part of Tear It Down program area, largely because you can't tear something down if you're not really understanding the ways in which it's operating, and is sponsored by Hanky Panky. I'm very pleased to welcome Shakira, who will be moderating this conversation and introduce our panelists. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Farida. I appreciate the intro. So let's get started. I'm going to introduce myself, then I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves. After that, I'm going to read a short intro. I'll have some questions for the panelists individually, and then we're going to round it up with a closing question. So my name is Shakira Rifos. I'm a masculine of center Black woman. I have a sort of Basquiat thing happening with my hair right now. I'm wearing a thick white sweater, sitting in a single office with a poster of the film Moonlight behind me. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the education outreach manager at the California Film Institute in Marin County, California. I've been here for a few years and I really love and appreciate my work. I'm also the associate producer of a documentary coming out soon called Naked Gardens, which is about a struggling nudist resort in Southwest Florida. So look out for that one. Let's meet our panelists. We'll just popcorn over. Erin, would you like to start with an introduction for me?
Hi, I'm Erin Thompson, she, hers. I'm a white woman with short, sort of raggedy pandemic haircut hair. I've got gold glasses and a spiffy Western shirt complete with pearl buttons, and I'm sitting in front of a background of a black and white textile. I'm a professor of art law and art crime at John Jay College of the City University of New York, and am a Barnard alum. And right now I am working on a book on controversies about American monuments, forthcoming from Norton.
Thank you so much. Gemma, you're next.
Hi, I'm Gemma Desai, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I identify as a woman of Indian descent. I have brown skin and dark brown hair and eyes, and I'm wearing gold earrings. I'm wearing a black top with kind of big sleeves. I'm in my study, which has lots of plants and loads of notes on its wall. I'm based in London and I have a background in film programming, and I've recently completed a research project called This Work Isn't For Us, which explores the human cost of, I guess, attempting institutional reform while navigating diversity policy, which is rooted in white supremacy.
Perfect, thank you. Raquel, you're next.
Hello, hello. My name is Raquel Cepeda. I don't mind if you say Cepeda. If you can't say Cepeda, it's fine with me. I identify as she, her, hers, and ella. I'm the first person in my family born in New York City in Harlem. I'm born of Dominican parents. I excuse me. I philosophically, I'm a Pan-African. I believe in communities of color getting together all over the world, because together coalescing together, we cannot be stopped. As a Dominican woman living in New York, I'm all about, first and foremost, of freedom, the complete and true freedom of my Black American sisters. And only until they're free, then we can be free. I am wearing a navy blue blazer. It's actually the very first purchase I got back in the day in the Village at 15. Is my first vintage Yves Saint Laurent, actually dark blue, navy blue blazer. I'm wearing a shirt by Nueva Yorkinos that says "Abolish ICE." It may say "Fuck ICE" somewhere, and family separation, and it's from Nueva Yorkinos, which is my daughter's online kind of museum for Latin American New York history. And I'm wearing a gold necklace. I have curly hair, and because it is the dead of winter, I'm light brown, but usually I'm a little darker. I ebb and flow on the spectrum of brownness. And I'm really happy and honored to be here with you all. I have a film that's actually right now and is going to be premiering, I think, on the 15th, called La Madrina, The Savage Life of Lorene Padilla, which looks at a former First Lady of the Savage Skulls, a very infamous gang from the 70s and late 60s, who over the years becomes a political activist and kind of straddles the line of still having one foot in the outlaw world and one as an activist, a matriarch, a spiritual leader, and a community activist.
Right on. Thank you, Raquel. Say it with your work. Say it with your fashion. I appreciate that. And next, Rep Scott, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We know that you have a busy schedule, and we really appreciate the space that you're giving this conversation.
I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much. I am State Representative Attica Scott. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am born and raised here in the United States. I'm a Black woman with brown skin. I am currently wearing my dark brown glasses. I have braces, and I think that the color of my braces are blue right now. I'm wearing a red turtleneck with pearl earrings and a pearl necklace that was made by immigrant women who their shop is in the district that I represent. I have on a blue and white striped blazer, and I'm in my legislative office in our state capitol, the People's House. And behind me is a cream colored wall with 3 pictures. One is a former Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, because I always have to remind myself to bring my own seat because folks here definitely won't bring one for me. And Marion Wright Edelman, who started the Children's Defense Fund, and a picture of our Kentucky Maternal and Infant Health Project, because those are big issues that I'm working on. And then there's a small desk with a children's book called Grace Goes to Washington, because I believe in our kids and the fact that we have to create a future that is full of their dignity and respect of their humanity. I serve in the state legislature here in Kentucky. I was the first Black woman elected in almost 2 decades. And for 4 years, I was the only Black woman here of our 138 member body. In 2020, the people of Kentucky elected a second Black woman to serve. And in 2018, elected the first ever Indian immigrant to serve in our state legislature, Representative Nima Kulkarni. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rep Scott. If everyone is ready to go, then we will get started. If I can get a thumbs up. Excellent. I'm going to start with a brief 5-minute introduction to the conversation. Today, we are going to talk about deconstructing whiteness, and specifically deconstructing white feminism. Women can largely attribute our ascending space in society to the feminist movement. Today, we are going to examine well-meaning white feminists and the institutions that refuse to hold them accountable for anti-Blackness. Let's take, for example, Barnard College, an institution named after a human trafficker of enslaved African with a progressive reputation. Founded in 1889, it took the school 40 years to accept their first Black student. Her name, Zora Neale Hurston. Just 1 year before, on Columbia's campus, the university witnessed the burning of a cross. Barnard's racial climate was no different. Hurston made the wise choice as a Black woman to live off campus and avoid the tensions that would later arise in residence halls. She accounts her time at Barnard as being very difficult. She had many unpleasant experiences with her race, experienced discrimination from teachers, students, and administration up until her graduation in 1928. Now you might say, Shakira, come on, that was 100 years ago. Yet 2 years ago, when Alexander McNabb, a Black man and student at Barnard's affiliate institution, Columbia, was physically pinned down by campus security when he was not forthcoming with his student ID when asked for it. Alexander stated as his reason the inconsistent and discriminatory practice of the security team's approach to selectively identifying students when convenient. Now, here's a more recent example. While the Black student body at Barnard and its administration grappled with an event that became national news, a white woman named Morgan Raum, then a Barnard senior, wrote in the Columbia Beacon that gender, not race, must have been the issue. Morgan Raum told Newsweek that she found the outrage over the incident to be hypocritical. She said that female students who a few months earlier had accused men of generally behaving like pigs and getting away with whatever they want were now indifferent about an adult male belligerently ignoring campus safety officers and refusing to show his identification. She said, "It's appalling that so many students, along with the Barnard administration and President Balick, would prejudge this incident to be purely the result of racism." Today, I have framed parts of my introduction and some of my questions around a collection of essays written by Professor Jessie Daniels called The Trouble with White Women. Jessie Daniels, pronoun she, her, is a faculty associate at the Harvard Berkman Klein Center and a professor of sociology at Hunter College, and affiliate faculty in Africana Studies, critical social psychology, and sociology at the Graduate Center at CUNY. Jessie Daniels is a white woman and a thought leader on feminist critical race theory. You may ask yourself why I would use her work to frame today's conversation, and the answer is blunt. Like most film festivals, an industry I am reluctantly proud to work in, the audience who will tune into this conversation will be primarily white. And white women tend to listen to other white women, no matter how many times a Black person has tried to tell them the exact same thing. I'm sure this is hard for some of you to hear, but I'm also sure this is the reason why you showed up for this conversation. And it's why we have assembled a group of experts to help us produce this panel. So in closing, whether we're talking about the suffragettes pushing Black women to the back of the march during the Women's March in the inauguration, or Hillary Clinton calling out systemically undervalued Black children, calling them super predators, and who during her run for president had nothing clear to say about anti-Black racism in conversations about reproductive justice. Or whether it be pink pussy hat wearers, who I marched side by side with in Washington, D.C., who cried outrage over founder Tamika Mallory's refusal to denounce Louis Farrakhan leading the Democratic National Convention to break ties with the Women's March altogether. Whether it's feminist icon, notorious RBG, aka Ruth Bader Ginsburg, initially telling Katie Couric in an interview, "It's really dumb for Colin Kaepernick to refuse to stand up for the national anthem. It's stupid." But the 83-year-old justice added she wouldn't lock a person up for doing it. Or whether it's Patricia Arquette telling Black women in her Oscar speech, "We white women have fought for you, Black women, now it's time for you to fight for us." Or whether it's Gina Rodriguez tweeting, "Marvel and DC are killing it in inclusion in women, but where are the Latinos?" In one fell swoop, erasing the existence of tens of millions of Afro-Latin people to an audience that hangs on her every word. Whether it's the 53% that voted for Donald Trump in 2016, or the 55% that voted for him in 2020. Whether it's Nancy Pelosi on one knee wearing a kente cloth. I've probably spoken long enough here, and I can probably go on for much longer, but I hope it's clear what I'm trying to say. And what I say in this panel is my opinion alone. I don't speak for other panelists, but When white women have the opportunity, the choice to either give up power and actually and practically contribute to Black liberation or keep their societal given power, when this option is put in front of them, white women will almost always choose power, which is rooted in white supremacy, which is rooted in patriarchy. Great. It's a little light introduction there. Thank you all so much for being here for this conversation. Rep Scott, I have a question for you starting off. Feminism tells us that we should be celebrating Kamala Harris's entry to the White House. I think most people consider that valid and important. And just like Barack Obama's presidency, we should celebrate when Blackness has access to the executive. Representation is a tool to show young people that they are seen in places where decisions are made. So we're not telling the whole story here, though. The easy part is that we're talking about a Black president and a Black vice president. The not so easy part that's not always mentioned is understanding that Barack Obama's Black father was born in Kenya. Kamala Harris's Black father was born in Jamaica. So America has yet to elect to the executive a descendant of antebellum slavery. In my mind, there is no better symbolism that shows the disdain that this country has for the very people it's commodified and oppressed for 400 years. Just like white feminism, we're so close, but it's just not it. I would like to hear from you about your career in politics, how white feminists or white feminism has helped you, and how white feminists and white feminism has been an obstacle in your journey.
I appreciate the question, and I will say, as someone who served in both local office and state office, that white feminism has been harmful for us as Black folks in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. I will speak specifically from that experience. And it was no less obvious than when my 19-year-old child and I were arrested last year fighting for justice for Breonna Taylor, and my white women colleagues stumbled over themselves to put out a simple statement in solidarity with me. In fact, it was supposed to be put out immediately, and then they decided to backtrack and not put it out at all. And then it was put out after charges were dropped. So I guess it was safe for white women to put out a statement in solidarity with Black women who were arrested for walking while Black. That's what that has looked like for me and my child in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, where at the time I was the only Black woman serving. Time and time again, I get those reminders that white women will go just so far. And then when they feel like their whiteness is not enough to protect them, will fall back and leave our Black community to fend for ourselves. And so we have so much further to go. And I also have to say that I'm not an advocate of electing just any Black person to office, right? I'm not looking for a descendant of antebellum slavery to be the president or vice president when they will turn their backs on us, when they will continue to keep kids in cages, when they will bomb Syria, when they will not fight for raising the minimum wage to the bare floor of what people should be receiving, when they won't work to end poverty. That's not the kind of Black elected official that I'm looking for. I'm looking for somebody who will risk it all, put it all on the line, and not lead in a way that looks at the next election, but instead will lead in a way that says, my people are hurting and suffering right now, and there's some work that I'm called to do. And if I'm not reelected, that's fine. That's not why I ran. I didn't run for the next election. So white feminism has us thinking that the bare minimum is enough, and that white women will only do enough to keep themselves safe.
Rep Scott, I'm also kind of wondering your constituents, like, have there been groups of people or communities that have, shown that support that you were looking for and that you've needed to ascend in your career?
Well, again, I will talk about the movement for justice for Breonna Taylor. One of my colleagues, a white woman state representative, the week that our attorney general said there would be no justice for Breonna or her family, when police were literally busting heads and locking up people by the hundreds, called her church and said, "We need sanctuary. Will you open your church for our church for us and for the protesters?" And her church didn't hesitate. They opened their doors. They made sure we were fed hot meals. They fought police when police were going to come barging into the church to try to rip people out of the sanctuary. And so that's the kind of white woman leadership that we need right now. She wasn't concerned about her reelection. She was on the ballot for November 2020. That wasn't a concern of hers. Her concern was that these Black people whose Black bodies are on the line need shelter, they need safety, and my church has the space and the ability to do it. That's the least that we can do. And she stepped up and she did it. So that's what we need. We need people who are going to put themselves on the front lines, but not performative politics. We're not talking about putting yourself on the front lines, not just for the photo op, but for real.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your response here. Raquel, I have a question for you. You're an artist, a filmmaker, but you're also a writer, working in industries that really grapple with representation, conversations that swirl around diversity and and equity somewhat. How are you able to decenter whiteness in your artistry? How do you decenter that? And do you see yourself as an activist filmmaker?
Well, I see myself kind of like an activist because I make film and I write despite all the obstacles before me. You know what I mean? So I don't give up. And as far as, for me, like white feminism has been very detrimental behind the scenes mostly, because if you don't allow, especially in the documentary world, white women to intervene and kind of save you, it becomes a very steep hill upward. You know what I mean? And it's very similar in publishing. Publishing is dominated by white women, liberal white women. And, I found myself, I remember, I had a book that came out, I think in 2014, but what I remember the most about it was pitching and just being reduced time after time. My experiences being reduced time after time after time. And I just remember, them weaponizing the idea of white feminism in order to kind of reel me in and be like, we're all here for the same fight. We're not. It's never been that way. From the beginning of feminism, it's never been that way. When women of color, Black, brown, Asian women didn't fall in line, white feminists, it's in the history books. White feminists weaponize their feminism to ostracize and otherize them. And it happens still to this day. While we people, as people of color have gone into third wave feminism, for instance, a lot, white first wave feminism really serves white women. And I'm seeing that today, right? So I made a costly decision not to be completely, not to mainstream and, by kind of allowing white intervention into my work. I don't think about the white male gaze, and I don't think about white feminism. When I have space to make film and I have space to write, I have to use that space that is afforded to me to represent my ideals, not of all Latinx Americans, not of all people of color, not of all people that think the way I do as a Pan-Africanist, but of myself, by adding to this rich cultural quilt, whether it's in writing or whether it's in film. So for me, I just don't, I allow my characters to exist without white intervention. And that has cost me a lot, but I will continue to do that.
I want to say, I think that's really, it might be important to hear for emerging filmmakers of color, Black filmmakers who are, thinking about really exploring the industry. And, younger folks these days are, far more radical than we were able to be. And what kind of advice can you give them specifically, like kind of towards actually getting their projects funded? That will allow them to stay true to themselves, do the same thing that you have found yourself doing by decentering that and not even thinking about it while being able to fund their projects. Is there any advice you have for them?
Well, I've done things not always the right way, right? So I learned mostly by failing, and I've learned I learned quite a bit, right? So for instance, I made a film about a group of young Latina teens who are from a suicide prevention program in the Bronx, who are transformed by an exploration of their identity. And I basically use all my book money, my advanced, with my producer, who is a white ally, a male, to make this film, kind of guerrilla style. And when it came out, I had a lot of pushback from white women that would tell me, "You making me feel bad. you're making me feel guilty, because I'm like, I didn't fucking take you into account. Like, I didn't even think about you. I'm not only talking about the Latinx community, which is very varied in its, in itself. I was trying to get into a dialogue with other communities of color. Like an art, for instance, in the Dominican Republic, while it's known for its anti-Blackness, it has a history with Black America and with Frederick Douglass. So I try, not to basically kind of preach, but to like kind of drop these jewels in a way that's palatable, where I can go into dialogue with other communities of color. You understand what I'm saying? So that's been kind of like what I've been doing. But for me, it has been a costly experience. And I'm still trying to figure out how to take all my experience and kind of tell the younger community or younger generation it's going to be okay, because it hasn't really been. I wish I had somebody to tell me, just because you're going into documentary, don't think that you're going to a space that's safe, or that, it's not trying to act like saviors, or it's not, trying to reduce you. It's a very reductive publishing and film and documentary filmmaking is a very reductive world. You understand what I'm saying? So that's what, so I'm still trying to figure it out.
I was just talking to a colleague a few days ago about kind of the sexy stories that you see coming from Sundance about documentaries that get sold for like $12 million, $8 million there, and just like kind of these insane amounts of money that get thrown at these stories, and some of them kind of resemble other stories. There's great work out there, but the idea that like documentary is supposed to be a place of like liberation, where people tell their stories, where the truth is told, but there seems to be a greater and greater like financial attachment to this storytelling. And we're not really like saying, some projects come out of Sundance and they get like $50,000, and your film meanwhile costs $1 million or $1.5 million, but we don't tell that side of it. Like we should be more truthful with emerging filmmakers and young people about that part of our industry.
Well, there's an influx now with the music business and music industry executives getting involved in documentaries in order to make the catalogs of some of their waning artists find a second and third life. So you see these films being sold for $25 million, $16 million, just because they either have a celebrity who's never directed attached to it as a director, or because it's, about white lives, right? A Billie Eilish, I don't know how that documentary went for that much money, but I guess, it's unfortunately right now there is a wave of like music industry. There's like executives getting into film.
I have to like begrudgingly share with the audience that this past weekend I watched 2 documentaries about Tekashi 6ix9ine back to back.
Shame on you.
So please don't ask me why. Please, I was in a place. Thank you, Raquel. I was introduced to your work by Lucy Mukherjee, former programmer for Outfest, currently leading Tribeca's programming team. This Work Isn't For Us has been making its way through the Film Festival Underground and the BIPOC Whisper networks. I read it once. I know I need to read it many more times, but it's helped me feel validated in my work. Could you please tell us a little bit about how you came to publishing this very deep catalog of thought, and also please explain the essay briefly to those who are not familiar with it?
Thank you. I'm really glad that the work sort of found you. The piece of work is like lots of different things. It lives as like this Google Doc online. And I can talk a little bit about the circulation of it in a bit and why it's in that form. But it was basically, you mentioned Zora Neale Hurston like before, and I was thinking about actually, there's a quote from Zora, which is, if you are silent about your pain, they'll kill you and say that you enjoyed it. And I think part of exploring the like diversity policy from my subjective experience is kind of lives in that quote a little bit, in the sense of there's so much silence about how these policies are not for us. And that they serve to really keep things the same, and that when people say that things are getting better, often the person that's measuring how much better it is or whatever is actually not the person that's most impacted by how unfair the situation is in the first place. So I sort of started it out of a time when I was given some money to stop working for a bit. I used to work for big institutions like the British Film Institute and the British Council, and I had a year off work. And I decided to, as much as I possibly could, living in London, to divest of whiteness from my work. So I kind of unfollowed or muted, like most white people, on Twitter, on Instagram. I really just invested in my relationships and reinvested in my relationships of my community, and found my community, actually, because I realized that we were so fragmented in our different organizations. Actually, there were a lot of people that I hadn't even met. So I spent a lot of time just doing that. That was like part of my process. And what ended up emerging was like partly a sort of a historical like exploration of what diversity policy had been in the last 30 or 40 years in the UK. What it was rooted in, which was actually policy around immigration. So this is like, you know, in the States, so something in your introduction, you were talking about the sort of settler slave logics that embed themselves in how we think about representation. But I guess in the UK, we're thinking about like the afterlife of like imperial domination, which all articulates itself in like our border logics, you know, who's allowed to be a citizen, who's allowed to, who's named an asylum seeker, who's a refugee, who's illegal. So yeah, I kind of started to get really interested in how those things fitted together and how they connected to the work that I did in the arts. I think from the first two speakers as well, I think what is really clear is that this work, whatever work that we do in all our different industries, can't be disconnected from like real things that are happening in the world. And that was something that I wanted to make visible in the work. So part of it is this history of diversity policy, part of it is like how it's impacted me. And then a lot of it is about my family history and how that filters into all of that work and how we make sense of it. I finished it this time last year, just before the pandemic hit. And I tried to send it to, I was just about to go back to work, and I tried to send it to my managers, 2 white women who I worked for. And neither of them would read it because they said it was too long. And it was really interesting to me that they didn't want to engage with something that related to their jobs, but also related to how I navigated the work that I did. And that was kind of interesting to me. So I kind of like put it away for a bit. And then obviously the fallout of the pandemic and the uprisings. And so I just decided to just release it as a Google Doc. And I'm really glad that I did that, because Raquel, like what you said about publishing, like I didn't have to deal with that. And that was so liberating, right? I was thinking about just liberatory art making is about not having to deal with gatekeepers. And I'm not saying I've made like a perfect piece of work, but for imperfect pieces of work to circulate, that's liberatory to me. Like this idea that like work has to be like refined through gatekeepers and people who actually aren't connected with the experiences in the work is really not freeing, right? And I guess the sort of, I've talked for a while, but the last thing I kind of wanted to say was that it began as this idea that I was creating this document that was making a case for reform. But because it circulated in the time that it did, it collided with this education that I had for the first time about abolition and abolitionist thinking, right? And I realized actually the way that I had gone about the work was actually a really like abolitionist approach to it, which was to invest in my relationships and not actually ask the institution to change, right? Like it was just I invested in a load of relationships, and actually I made myself free from those places. And I think that I now think of it as a case for abolition in the most creative way that we can think of it, right? Which is what it is. It's a creative idea. And I think how Rep Scott and Raquel have talked about how they do their work is actually about that. They've invested in the things that they care about and that are close to their communities. And that's what makes us free. And so I guess I'm trying to think about also how it's circulated as what it's told me about how the ways that we share work, the share ideas and connect with each other don't allow us to be free. But yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I think that's incredible. As you were talking, I was thinking about abolition. I was thinking about like restorative justice. I was thinking about all these things that I think like are really romanticized when it comes to like how artists work and like telling stories. And then when it comes to like the people that are supposed to curate those spaces, like even at the highest level of like deciding what culture is. So you have like these massive film festivals, and then you have like these tiny town regional film festivals who look towards the massive film festivals as what to do. You know, when I was I worked for Sundance seasonally. I moved to Salt Lake City for 5 months. It was one of the worst experiences of my life. I didn't see a Black person in the office for at least a month and a half. And then the LA crew started coming in. And this is supposed to be the organization that informs other film festivals how to talk to audiences. I want to ask you a little bit about divesting from whiteness. The kind of like courage or the impulse and the steps that you take for that. And this is, mostly as advice to younger people. I talk about this. I have a beautiful young friend who is really, she's mixed and she's like really grappling with like the white side of her family and letting go of the power that it has over her, understanding that that whiteness has power. If I lean too much into my Blackness, am I going to lose that? And I see it and it breaks my heart. And I would love to have you share, like, what steps did you take to actually like do that? Because it sounds extremely liberating.
Yeah, I think like there are really simple things, like I said, about the social media, but I'm glad you mentioned your friend, because actually I think one of the reasons that I felt an urgency to do that was because I had my daughter and she's mixed, and I saw like, so I spent like a year with her, like on maternity leave, like completely, in this world with her. She, as far as I knew, like, and our family knew, like, she looked really like me. And then I suddenly like went back into work and all these circles, and everyone kept saying she doesn't look like you. And I realized that was like literally only to do with the shade of her skin. And I think there was something that made me think, wow, like exactly what you've just said about the power that has and could have, and how do we, I guess, it's about honoring both sides for her. It's not about, for me, about getting her to divest, but how do I balance that for her? How can I make sure that she doesn't think that it gives her disproportionate power in the world, right? Like, and so it kind of went from there. And so it was about, then I was like, okay, if this is the case, then I need to give her a counterbalance. There needs to be so much in her life. She needs to see me. And I think, we talk about representation, like we need to see people in positions of power. Do you know what? Like, I don't think that I do. I kind of like what Rep Scott was saying. Like, we don't need people who kind of have an unlearned domination and oppression in positions of power. Actually, don't we just need to be modeling like these other relationships of care? And I don't know. I just wanted, it was a very personal thing, right? So it was very much about, what do I have too much of in my life? And how can I balance that out again? And why do I have those relationships, and do they serve me? So yeah, really practical things like social media is transformative, because what I realized is that a lot of my white film industry friends were just posting the same things over and over again. But when I looked slightly outside of that, there were all these other things that people were talking about and questioning. And then you immediately don't feel alone, which means you immediately feel more powerful. You do feel powerful if you're being validated. And and that goes back to Zora Neale Hurston, right? Like trying to be kind of honest about what is going on, because actually when we're in these like monocultural spaces, we're told to be quiet and silent, and not for our own comfort, but for other people's. So it'll be different for everybody. And I don't want to say like, if you just change your social media, then you'll be free, because it's like definitely not about that, but it's about thinking about who's in your life and how that might change to make you feel better about the world that you're in, right?
Thank you. I really appreciate that piece of advice. Erin, let's talk about white women and the defense of lynching. Well, I'm going to read a short piece, and then I'm going to ask you about how white feminism lives in the kind of archival space and in the work that you do. White women and the defense of lynching. White women were not merely victims of patriarchal power. They gained power by supporting white supremacy, and they did so through families. White women actively participated in weaving together family knits with the thread of white supremacy. We can clearly see this in the messages written on the back of lynching postcards. If you've never heard about lynching postcards, please go ahead and Google that. Massive trigger warning. Just know that you are going to see Black folks being lynched. Postcards of lynchings were sold. Postcards of lynchings were sold in dime stores throughout the US well into the 1950s and 1960s, and they continue to circulate today through sites like eBay, featuring gruesome images of murdered corpses, mostly Black men on the front. The backs of the postcards often carried casual familial exchange, such as this one. The back of the postcard, I'm clearly not going to show the image, but the back of the postcard says, they don't know who done it. I guess they don't care much. I don't. Do you? The notation follows the conventions of a postcard greeting, but with a murderous twist. Another example reads, this is the barbecue we had last night. My picture is to the left with a cross over it. Your son, Joe. Consider the following. It is women who do the domestic labor of stitching together family relationships, keeping family albums, encouraging their children to keep in touch, send a postcard. And it is that labor that is put into use to the service of white supremacy in these postcards. Photographic postcards of lynching victims function to solidify the ties for a white community, reinforced through the spectacles of dead Black bodies. Sentimental and material familial bonds were reconfirmed through images of white violence, reasserting a wider, larger, imagined white community. Erin, can you tell us a little bit how in your work, we look at, let's say, like the Capitol insurrection, mostly men, but we did see a lot of women. We recently found out that the leaders of the Oath Keepers is a woman. Where in your work have you found that it was white women responsible for upholding white supremacist practice and not white men?
So one thing that I've been thinking about recently are the number of Southern states that erected monuments to women of the Confederacy in the early 20th century. And almost all of these monuments feature a woman and a book and a child, because the idea is that they are being honored for being the keepers of Confederate memory. So while white men were doing the lynchings, were enacting the legislation that deprived Black people of political power and so many other things, it was white women who were teaching the children that this was okay, that this was the right thing to do. They were inculcating white supremacy and then supporting it all the way down the line. And not just lynching postcards and that sort of more popular image, but all over the country, we have monuments to the Confederacy that were funded, organized, sponsored by the United Daughters of the Confederacy, a group specifically for keeping the memory of a particular type of white supremacy alive. And they also were extremely concerned with scrutinizing school textbooks to make sure that the war between the states was something that was more palatable to what they wanted race relations to be. So there's really no separating white feminism or white female leadership from the keeping up of white supremacy up till now. And I try and see my work as, in a weird way, doing the same thing. So I'm teaching history. I've got the book. I've got the children or the college students, but I'm trying to show a different thing and to point out this white supremacy instead of upholding it. And I don't know if I'm doing a good job, but I try because I have, I think, this responsibility from this massive history that has put white feminists in the place they hold now.
Thank you so much, Erin. It's actually incredibly interesting that I'm an educator. I used to teach high school history. Now I do work in film education, film analysis for the California Film Institute. A few days ago, I said to my partner, we should start thinking about doing a documentary about who writes our textbooks. I said this like 3 days ago, because I don't think we realize this like systemic ways that I'm happy that you mentioned like the source of that.
Yeah, the UDC, the daughters would stamp textbooks that unfair to the South if they thought they, dared to mention slavery or anything. It's really something.
Thank you. Thank you all for your individual responses. I feel like I could keep talking to all of you forever, but unfortunately we only have about 15 minutes left, maybe a little less. So I want to kind of wrap up the conversation by just having more of a free form. If you'd like to respond, please just go ahead and do so, and just kind of like we can popcorn back and forth or respond to one another. Don't wait for me to call on anybody. Last week, I read an article on CNN.com by a female journalist who referred to the Proud Boys as a fraternity-like organization without any further context, just written on CNN.com. My question to you is, how do each of you feel that the media still centers whiteness and how they discuss current events, and also how it relates and disrupts your space? I'm really interested to hear about that from each of you.
I'll go chime in here with a couple of things. One is I graduated from a historically Black college, an HBCU, and to hear such a flippant description of the Proud Boys as if they are anything like the brothers in the fraternities that I went to college with, who did community service, and of course through some of the best parties, but weren't spreading feces across college campus or tying nooses up to hang any of us, or having zip ties to tie our hands behind our backs. So it's a disgusting description of hate group that had every intention of murdering people in our state capitol. And it is also a reflection of some of what I, as a Black elected official in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, experience when legislators will ask me if I'm working in a bipartisan way with Republicans in the state house on legislation, but never ask them, why in 5 years have you heard 0 bills by Black legislators? We'll never ask them that question, but always will ask us if the bills we file are bipartisan, as if we owe our whole selves to white folks, but white folks don't ever have to even hear the bills that we're working on. Why would you even ask us that question? They're not even hearing our bills. Is that a fraternity? It's a hate group.
Can I chime in? I've been thinking a lot about this subject. Well, first of all, I have a magazine and journalism background. I was editor, I was writer, I was looking at culture through the guise of classic salsa, but also hip hop culture, hip hop music. Those are the only spaces back in the day where people like me could actually write about cultural criticism, because white people were getting all the work. And you know, and I mean, I'm not surprised one bit that an article would reduce them to being just a fraternity. And I think a lot of the times people, you know, they kind of project sometimes rather than report. And sometimes guilt and white guilt manifests itself in these kind of ways where you don't want to see stuff. And you don't forget that people that are writers are also human, right? I'm actually developing a project now on people of color, especially men, and white supremacist groups. And it's just, I've been thinking a lot about this because I was shocked in the very beginning that the head of the Proud Boys in the United States, or the chairman or what have you, or somebody with a lofty title, is Afro-Cuban. Because the whole idea of, you know, being Afro-Cuban and that identity goes against, you know, this, white supremacy. But I think that what these groups are doing now is that they're enticing men, especially men, some women, a lot of women, but especially men, through resentment, resentment, and also Western chauvinism. It's this idea that Francis Parker Yoki, was talking about decades and decades ago, in the realm of, you guys should Google that, in the realm of, World War II and Nazism. So that's being kind of transposed into what's going on today. And it's really interesting, but a fraternity, they are not. But it's worth spending some time thinking about why they're attracting so many folks of color.
Do you feel that, like, specific to when it comes to promoting your work, do you feel like you're given opportunities or being asked, by white journalists equally? Do you see a difference in how they engage with your work than with journalists of color?
What do you mean?
Well, so like opportunities that come up to interview you or to talk to you about your films or to promote your film. Like, do you see those opportunities mostly coming from journalists that are like from the communities that you talk about? Or do you see a lot of white journalists show up and try to understand and share what you're working on?
A lot of times, it's people of, you talk differently to different groups of people. There's a lot of things that don't have to be said when you're talking to journalists of color, right? Even if they're not, like, for instance, La Madrina is Boricua. She's Puerto Rican from New York City, but still other people from marginalized communities can identify with that. So with her experience. So it's, it's a different kind of, swag that you use when you talk about your work with your own folks, right? And I do find myself having to do due diligence and go overboard when trying to make her out to look like a human being. When I speak to, journalists that are white, or when I don't read reviews, but my executive producer does. And sometimes, there are lines in there that I get wind of that are reductive because they don't understand. So unfortunately, you know what I mean? You open yourself up to that, but I don't really give a shit. I mean, I have to be honest. I just don't give a shit, because it reaches, when you make something with unclenched fists and an open heart, people will find it. The people will find it.
There, of course, in the past few days have been a lot of conversation about the Hollywood Foreign Press Association lack of Black members. We're not going to go into that, but I encourage people to definitely Google that conversation as it's coming up now in conversation with Raquel. Gemma and Aaron, can I hear from either of you here? Or both?
I feel like, to go back to your question about the Proud Boys, there is a debate in classics. So I'm originally an ancient Greek and Roman and ancient Near Eastern art historian. And there's a debate about how we should think about the use of classical imagery by hate groups like this. And how that ties into the complete hostility of classics as a field to a diversity of voices ongoing. It's hard to know how seriously should you take someone, how much should you mock them, but it's definitely not enough to sort of point out mistakes in the use of classical Theban mythological references or whatever. So there are messages that if you just sort of dismiss or mock them, you are centering the whiteness of the message by not even seeing its harm and its import.
Yeah, I think like just building on that, actually, I was thinking about coherence, like that we often think that these movements have some coherence and an actual idea behind them that is thought through and communicated to the whole. But actually that's often imposed because of experiences with history, which we have to listen to. But I think I was thinking about belonging, actually, and it goes back to like what Rep Scott was saying about public solidarity, but also about people's wish to belong to these like frats, this idea of belonging together. And actually, I think to go back to your original thing about white feminism is that I think it's not enough, is it, to like read something or watch a film or program a film or say that you're going to vote for someone or say, oh, I heard about these postcards and now I'm going to tell everyone, whatever. Like, are you willing to fall out of belonging to your group? Are you willing to like risk something in order to like stand by that and amplify that? And I think that's probably what's missing. And I think that deeply relates to this urge to belong to something really toxic. I think the Proud Boys are, which is, I'm sure, why you have drawn attention to it, is exactly the same kind of group as like the liberal white feminists in the arts or in all of these other sectors, right? So yeah, like I'm really interested to see if we can moving towards like falling in and out of belonging with each other, to push this forward a bit more.
Thank you so much, Gemma. I actually want to have all of you just state real quickly where folks can find more about you or your work, because I feel like there's so much energy in this conversation. I would love to keep going, but we're about to close here. So Rep Scott, where can we learn more about you?
Yes, just very quickly, folks can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at Attica Scott 4KY, ATTICA, the number 4KY. This has been amazing. Thank you all so much.
Raquel?
Hey, you can find me at Raquel Cepeda on Twitter, which I've been engaging less and less in. Instagram and Facebook is at Raquel Cepeda Words and Films. And my website is jollyrancher.com, which is DJALI Rancher, RANCHER.com.
Gemma?
Oh, one more thing.
Yes.
And I have a film that you can watch at Athena Film Festival, La Madrina, The Savage Life of Lorene Padilla. It'll start screening on the 15th. You don't want to miss it.
Thank you.
You can find me on Instagram. I am Gemma Desai, and like there's a link to all of my work there.
I'm going to decenter myself and instead recommend that you check out Hyperallergic, which is an online arts publication that really centers art and criticism by people of color.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. This has been incredible. I feel great.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for joining this conversation. We want to thank Athena Film Festival for inviting us all to be here. Rep Scott, especially you, thank you for taking out so much time, the good work of serving the people to chat with us. Raquel, good luck with your film. Gemma, I'm going to be talking to you about talking to my organization, about everything that you've written in your essay. And Aaron, thank you so much. When I do finally get to that documentary, I'm going to hit you up about some tips and some facts. Thank you so much for joining us, and good luck, Athena Film Festival. Thank you so much.